Hello, everybody. I don't know who everybody is. I hope you can. I hope you can all hear me fine enough. Well, first day of spring. I forget when it was exactly, but it was several days ago, and I missed it. March 19th, and now it's March 25th. What do you know? So anyway, I have a song that I like to play about springtime, and it's written by Tom Lehrer, who, as far as we know, is still alive in his 90s. He hasn't really done much since the 1960s in the field of comedy music. Oh, hello, Jacob. Glad to see you're watching. Anyway, without further ado, Poisioning Pigeons in the Park. Spring is here, spring is here. Life is Skittles and life is beer. I think the loveliest time of the year is the spring. I do, don't you? Of course you do. But there's one thing that makes spring complete for me, and makes every Sunday a trip for me. All the world seems in tune on a spring afternoon when we're poisoning pigeons in the park. Every Sunday you'll see my sweetheart and me as we poison the pigeons in the park. When they see us coming, the birdies all try and hide, but they still go for peanuts when coated with cyanide. The sun shining bright, everything seems alright when we're poisoning pigeons in the park. We've gained notoriety and caused much anxiety in the Audubon Society with our games. They call it impiety and lack of propriety, and quite a variety of unpleasant names. But it's not against any religion to want to dispose of a pigeon. So if Sunday you're free, why don't you come with me and we'll poison the pigeons in the park? And maybe we'll do in a squirrel or two as we're poisoning pigeons in the park. We'll murder them all amidst laughter and merriment, except for the few we take home to experiment. My pulse will be quickening with each drop of strychnine we feed to a pigeon. It just takes a smidgen to poison a pigeon in the park. But be careful when you're going to parks, because there's still people congregating around there. I actually do have the lyrics and some of the music for New Math in this book. I'm not going to play the Masochism Tango, though. Can I do New Math real quick? I was going to move on to reading some Edgar Allan Poe, but now that Jacob Dickens has said something, I sort of want to play New Math, so I'm going to indulge in one more song if I can find it. Page 109. So this is a song that oh, hi Noel. This is a song that sort of captures that frustration that Mr. Incredible felt trying to read Dash's math textbook in the movie Incredibles 2. So we're presented with the problem 342 minus 173. Now, if you're if you're an adult of a certain age, you might be tempted to, do that little write it out and cross the numbers. But we want to be able to think about this analytically, where you have to understand that the idea of the concepts and how to get the answer is more important than the answer itself. So if you could all write this down again, 342 minus 173. I'm so sorry I don't have a whiteboard with me. You can't take 3 from 2. 2 is less than 3, so you look at the 4 in the tens place. Now that's really 4 tens, so you make a 3 tens, regroup, and you change a 10 to 10 ones, and you add them to the 2 and get 12, and you take away 3, that's 9. Is that clear? Now instead of 4 in tens place, you got 3 because you added 1, that is to say 10 to the 2, but you can't take 7 to a 3, so you look at the hundreds place. From the 3, you then use 1 to make 10 tens, and you know why 4 minus 1. And you know why 4 plus minus 1 plus 10 is 14 minus 1. Because addition is commutative, right? And so you got 13 tens and you take away 7 and that leaves 5. Well, 6 actually. But the idea is the important thing. Now go back to the hundreds place and you're left with 2 and you take away 1 from 2 and that leaves. Everybody get 1? Not bad for the first day. Hooray for new math. New math. It won't do you a bit of good to review math. It's so simple, so very simple, that only a child can do it. Now that actually wasn't the answer I had in mind, because the book that I wanted to do, the book that I got this problem out of, wants you to do it in base 8. But don't panic. Base 8 is just like base 10, really, if you're missing 2 fingers. You can't take 3 from 2. 2 is less than 3, so you look at the 4 in the 8's place. Now that's really 4 8, so you make a 3 8 regroup, and you change an 8 to 8 ones and add them to the 2, and you get 1 2 base 8, which is 10 base 10. And you take away 3, that's 7. Now instead of 4 in the 8's place, you got 3, because you added 1, that is to say 8 to the 2, but you can't take 7 from 3, so you look at the 64s. 64? How did 64 get into it? I hear you crying. Well, 64 is 8 squared, don't you see? You ask a silly question, you get a silly answer. From the 3, you then use 1 to make 8 8s, and you add those 8s to the 3, and you get 1 3 base 8, or in other words, in base 10 you have 11, and you take away 7, and 7 from 11 is 4. Now you go back to the 64s, and you're left with 2, and you take away 1 from 2, and that leaves. Now let's not always see the same hands. 1, right! Whoever got 1 can stay after class and clean the erasers. Hooray for new math, new math. It won't do you a bit of good to review math. It's so simple, so very simple, that only a child can do it. Now I'll admit to you folks, I did not come here to play the piano. What I came here to do was read the Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Masque of the Red Death. Now, to my knowledge and remembrance, I have never read this short story before, but with the current pandemic that is sweeping across America, I keep hearing people mentioning this short story and telling me that I need to read it. So, while I have gotten a lot of criticism for my constant buying of books that I never actually read over the past semester, among these books that I bought was the Norton Anthology of American Literature, which happens to have in it The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm going to read this, and as I'm reading this, you can take satisfaction in knowing that I've never experienced this story before. And I think I know very little about it except for what I see in memes. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar, and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleedings at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong yet and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair from without or frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there were cards. There was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the fifth of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn on every 20 or 30 yards, and each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of a stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lit with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung over all the windows, hung over all the ceiling and down the walls. Windows was not in the text, I'm sorry. Falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenance of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment, too, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when its minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be stricken, there came forth from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians in the orchestra were constrained to pause momently in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and that the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows each to the other that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embrace 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock. And then there was the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great feat, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the costumes of the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of which has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque fantasies with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fantasies such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of velvet. And then momently all is still and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and then a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on till at length was sounded the 12th hour upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who rebelled. And thus again it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur, expressive at first of disapprobation and surprise, and then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. And an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's infinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless, which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be properly made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger, neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of his face, was besprinkled with a scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or of distaste. But in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the group that stood around him, "who dares thus to make mockery of our woes? Uncase the varlet, that we may know whom we have to hang tomorrow at sunrise from the battlements. Will no one stir at my bidding? Stop him and strip him, I say, of those red and vast vestures of sacrilege." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now with deliberate and stately step made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were none who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the halls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and thence even to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating creature, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly round and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony grave ceremonies and corpse-like masque which they handled so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief fast of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. That's the end of the story. Sorry, I'm trying to see all these comments now. Anyway, looks like I've been streaming for about 26 minutes now. Got 6 of you still watching. A few people dropped off, it looks like. Tom Lehrer songs that I'd like to play. You know what? There's one that I always enjoy. And it almost seems appropriate for these times, only it's about nuclear destruction in World War II. Or sorry, World War III. Which we're still waiting for, I suppose. The note for this song says it goes eschatologically. It's called "We Will All Go Together When We Go." And I'm not as good at playing this one. When you attend a funeral, it is sad to think that sooner or later those you love will do the same for you. And you may have thought it tragic, not to mention other adjectives, to think of all the weeping they will do. But don't you worry, no more ashes, no more sackcloth, and an armband made of black cloth will someday nevermore adorn a sleeve. For if the bomb that drops on you gets your friends and neighbors too, there'll be nobody left behind to grieve, and we will all go together when we go. What a comforting fact that is to know. Universal agreement and inspiring achievement. Yes, we all will go together when we go. We will all go together when we go. All suffused with an incandescent glow. No one will have the endurance to collect on his insurance. Lords of London will be loaded when they go. We will all fry together when we fry. We'll be French fried potatoes by and by. There will be no more misery when the world is our rotisserie. Yes, we all will fry together when we fry. Down by the old maelstrom, there'll be a storm before the calm. Forgive me for that. And we will all bake together when we bake. There'll be nobody present at the wake. With a complete participation in that grand incineration, nearly 3 billion ounces of well-done steak. We will all char together when we char. And let there be no mourning of the bar. Just sing out a TDM when you see that ICBM. And the party will be come as you are. We will all burn together when we burn. There will be no need to stand and wait your turn. When it's time for the fallout and St. Peter calls us all out, we'll just drop our agendas and adjourn. You will all go directly to your respective Valhallas. Go directly, do not pass go. Do not collect $200. And we will all go together when we go. I have to omit that part because it's some slightly objectionable language. When the air becomes Uranus, we will all go simultaneous. Bye, everybody.